I guess let's go over our agenda just real quickly. We are going to discuss what political speech is, what laws pertain to politics and our election process, what can employers do and not do within the workplace, and also who can be held accountable, and how should you manage political speech in the workplace. Right. So what is political speech vis-a-vis in the workplace? It can be verbal, that's the obvious. You decide to start a discussion with your coworker on the most recent debate. But that also includes your bumper stickers, campaign buttons, t-shirts, posts you like on Facebook, not necessarily what you've written, but it shows up every time you like a post or a picture from somebody else.
That's a great point, right? I hadn't thought about that. Social media is a pretty natural thing to think about. You make a comment, but you like somebody else's comment, right? So that's a really good point. I think what's important about this is that people always think, like, it's the obvious, that it's verbal. And political speech or activity is not necessarily just verbal. You can speak without saying a word, right? So, like something on your lawn, for example. I thought it was interesting. I forgot, I meant to wear my Bernie bracelet tonight, just as an example. Great.
So we're all aware we have amendments that protect our rights as Americans, and the First Amendment is our right to free speech. So can your employer actually inhibit that right to free speech? And the answer is yes, it can, especially in the private sector, where you have more freedom with your freedom of speech, say, is in the public sector. So you work for a state agency like I do, really would not be to my benefit to start, preaching out front of the Department of Labor on who I believe everyone should be voting for.
Yeah, it's a good point. This is probably the most common defense that if you try to deal with an employee in the workplace around a number of issues, where they'll say, well, I have a constitutional right to free speech. Well, actually not in the workplace you don't. Not if it's a private employer, you do not. So you certainly have it in your own home and other venues, but not in a private employer. So kind of moving from the First Amendment right to free speech, there are several other laws that provide us with the ability to express ourselves in political context in the workplace even. So the first one, I'm going to talk about the first one, which is a set of laws. Sometimes these laws are referred to as lifestyle discrimination laws. So the reason for that is they originated as laws to protect use of legal products, specifically tobacco. So there were employers that were saying, we're going to not hire people that smoke. And so states went ahead and said, wait a minute, this is illegal behavior. You can imagine what states might have instituted this protection, right? Perhaps that have some interest in the tobacco industry as well. But went ahead and said, wait a minute, this is illegal behavior. How can you prohibit people? How can you say we're not going to hire people because they are doing something that's totally illegal? The other reason it's called lifestyle laws is often things that you might do that end up on Facebook that maybe the employer disagrees with. Perhaps, I don't know, you're getting married at a zombie event, or you're skydiving, or I don't know, you could be doing something. There are laws that say, hey, those are legal activities. As long as they're legal activities, you should be able to do that. But it's really limited, as you'll see here. There's only a handful of states that cover this. Colorado, North Dakota, New York, and California. California, no surprise, most likely has the broadest law with regards to this. So it protects both applicants and employees. Interesting that some states actually limit it. New York, for example, specifically mentions political activities, consumable products, union membership, but actually mentions recreational conduct. So again, skydiving, zombie weddings, etc. Some of the other states are more specific about the non-absolute right is really as long as it doesn't interfere with the employer's business or business interest. So it's important to keep in mind if you happen to work in one of these states that fine, the right to express yourself, free speech may not be the issue, but this could be the issue.
So each state has their own set of specific laws, as we all know, and that includes political speech and activity. So as we said, California has the most liberal laws, and I did actually work as a retail manager within California for about 2 years in my past life. And I fortunately did not have to handle employees during a political season, because I could only imagine the types of fights and discussions I would have to be involved in. And you know, they can wear their Bernie button or their Hillary T-shirt or whatever they want to work and outside the workplace. That you cannot hold them accountable for that in California. So these 5 states on the top here have all similar laws, whereas Oregon actually is the only one that has a law against employers forcing their employees to attend political events.
Yeah, and I think it's important when we talk about these laws and the last set of laws we just looked at. You think about how these laws are enacted and how they're carried out. We're talking really about them applying to employers of a certain size or more. So they're certainly not going to apply to the small business that has 4 or 5 employees. Typically the threshold is somewhere around 20, 25 employees or more before these laws kick in, regardless of what the projection is. That includes other laws that we've certainly studied in the HR program, like FMLA, et cetera. So same thing applies here for the most part. You know, it's important that you're taking all of these into consideration together, and I think the Oregon law is really important because the next slide we're going to talk about, because it is the only state that has a law that prohibits the employer from actually forcing employees to attend political meetings. Now, that probably seems really foreign to people in this room. Like, what do you mean? So yes, it is legal, thanks to Citizens United. Citizens United is a 2010 Supreme Court decision, which most people focus on Citizens United with regards to the fact that it opened up some sort of backdoor ways to get over the limitations on how much you can contribute to a particular political candidate. It created what's called super PACs, and so that's the way most people know Citizens United when they hear that. They say it's wrong because you know, these huge super PACs are able to contribute, and you know, they're being funded by large corporations, individuals, etc. And so the part that we're concerned with, though, tonight, while we may have issues with that, is really it goes back to Oregon law, that in fact Citizens United removed the limits so that now employers can in fact communicate directly with non-management employees about their political leanings, that they're personally as the a particular owner of the company or the organization's leanings indirectly, can talk about their political beliefs, can force employees to attend. I could call my employees into a conference room and say, I'm going to tell you about why Trump is so wonderful, and you are going to have to sit here and listen. And I can do that legally, so unless I'm in Oregon, right? So thanks to Citizens United. So previously, the limitation was this kind of communication could only happen with your management employees, but now it could happen with your line employees. And not only could I bring you into a conference room, I could say to you, you're going to attend a political fundraiser tonight. That's part of your job. You're a salesperson, I'm going to send you to a political fundraiser. Doesn't mean I'm going to force you to contribute money. That's something entirely different. And there are actually some laws, we're not going to get into those tonight with regards to that. But I could say that, or this is what we're going to do today from 12 to 4, we're going to go to a political fundraiser and everybody's going to go with us. This is what we're going to do in the workplace, and that would be completely legal. Interesting, huh? I'm wondering if we have any questions, Allie. Not so far? Okay, I know there's a little bit of a delay. Those of you, if you are online and asking questions, there's a little bit of a delay, so just be patient. If you have a question, we'll certainly address it even if it feels like we've moved on.
So, like we said, there's all these laws that encompass politics in the workplace, but with that, a lot of exemptions. And that includes the NLRA and union and non-union employees. So you may have a policy that says you can't wear campaign buttons to work, but your union has decided that they want to endorse a actual candidate, so they can create a button and put their union logo on it, and that will be an allowed campaign paraphernalia that you can wear in the workplace. These rights are also included within union contracts, so during the collective bargaining, you can put your do's and do's nots in within that.
It is actually pretty common that most most union contracts or collective bargaining agreements will have specific language with regards to, during elections, showing support for the candidate that the union, going back to Citizens United and super PACs, that the union is supporting. So it's not unusual to see this at all. And it's important to understand, I think a lot of people, we talk about this in the HR program, is that the National Labor Relations Act is an act that is then interpreted by a board, the NLRB. The board has interpreted political discussion to be a protected concerted activity. So what that means is protected concerted activities are activities that typically have to do with terms and conditions of employment. It could be treatment, or it could be benefits, compensation. Where you hear about this a lot is on Facebook. You see these stories about someone being fired for saying something on Facebook about their boss. Well, under the National Labor Relations Act, with the NLRB's current interpretation, it depends what the comment is, whether or not that's legal. If the comment is, my boss treats me unfairly, schedules my shifts, different times than what I'm supposed to be scheduled, that kind of thing, mean to me and talks about, speaks down to me and doesn't assign me the same work as, somebody the same level as me, that kind of thing. Those things potentially could be covered activities, and that's where you hear that people are being fired for saying things, say, on Facebook or Twitter, are then being rehired because, in fact, it's considered protected activity, protected speech. So in the workplace, it's the same thing, exact same thing, and it implies, a lot of people get confused. I know Helen mentioned it, but I like to draw attention to this. You don't have to work in a union environment for the NLRA to apply to you. It actually applies to non-union people, managers even. And that is a new interpretation of the NLRA that has come in the last 5 to 7 years. Some of those things have been along. Weingarten rights, for example, have been much longer period of time, but specifically the interpretation of whether managers can criticize other managers, their company, etc. So, good. Oops. There we go.
So let's move on to a little less complex but equally important issue, which is the time off to vote. So how many of you think that all the states actually allowed you time off to vote?
Yeah, prior to tonight. Anybody wonder? Yeah.
Yeah. It actually, only 50% of the states actually give you the right to vote and time off. Other states include like paid time off or unpaid time off, depending on the state and what's allowed. Are you salaried? Are you not salaried? So again, it depends on your state and also your organization. Whereas, the organization may decide to give you a little more rights than the actual state has decided to enact.
There's a couple of funny ones. Oh, did you have a question?
Yeah, just
Sorry.
a quick question. So you're talking about like the state level, but don't most organizations allow you to take time off, for voting purposes anyway?
Yes, actually, we have the 2016 SHRM survey found that 86% of organizations actually do allow that.
Yeah. So there was a recent survey in May of 2016. We're going to reference it a couple times actually. This is one of the questions they asked. So while only 50% approximately have some sort of protection here, most companies do. That's a great question. They do put this in place. It makes sense if you think about it. It's a perfect example of where do you need a law, or can we leave it up to the private employers to make that determination? In this case, the majority have made that call that said this is an important process. We want people to participate. I think there's a couple of things that are interesting about paid versus unpaid. What I found interesting anyway, for paid time off laws, there's 24 states. Massachusetts is not one of them. We have a law for unpaid. It's interesting that sometimes you have to, there's 3, Hawaii, Maryland, and Oklahoma require you to provide proof of voting before you get paid. Okay, you have to bring back some proof. It's like getting a note from mom that says, I voted. I don't know if you put that little sticker. I don't know. I can't imagine, because we don't do that here in
Take a
Massachusetts,
selfie
right?
at the polls.
Selfie at the polls. Yeah, I don't know. It's a great question, right? How do you prove?
There you go.
Yeah.
A copy of my ballot, please?
Yeah, I need to take that with me because my boss is going to ask me. Yeah, so I thought that was really interesting. And then I also thought this is ironic. We had a good chuckle about this, Helen and I. Ohio only covers paid time off for salaried employees. Anybody know why that's problematic, aside from her and I, since we're HR experts? But anybody know why that's sort of it's moot, shall we say? Anybody have any ideas? Where are my HR people in the audience? Laura Hutter, I know you're out there. Bree Seavey, you guys should know the answer to this. No?
Repeat the question one more time.
So Ohio only provides paid time off to vote if you are salaried. Why would that be moot?
Salaried employees are exempt anyway.
Thank you. Oh, very good. So salaried employees can't be docked on a partial days basis
If I
for
work
taking
6
time.
hours, I still
So
get,
if I work 4 hours, I still get paid for the full day because I'm salaried, right? So providing me with paid time off to vote is,
wasn't a trick question.
yeah. It feels like a trick question though, doesn't it? So it's important to note though, when there are paid time off laws, they follow a sort of a general pattern here. I mentioned it's up to 2 hours. I don't know why. You know why it's 2 hours?
I don't know what the voter turnout this election season,
Yeah.
it's surprising. I mean, you could be stuck in line for hours.
Yeah, so
Mm.
it's strange that it has to be, it provides typically up to 2 hours is what most of these laws cover. I don't know why that is. I think if we think about like shift work, I think this was envisioned back in the day when people worked an 8-hour-a-day. So if you think most polls are open from what, 8 to 8? So there would be 2 hours on either end. I don't know how many of you work an 8-hour-a-day. I certainly don't. Yeah, so I'm not sure. Maybe that's where it comes from. And of course, usually they have something to do with whether or not you have 2 consecutive hours around your workday to be able to get to the polls and do that. And then, you know, notifying people in advance. Of course, you can't just sort of show up and be like, hey, I'm going to vote today. That's what's going to happen.
So
Yeah.
back to Massachusetts.
Yeah.
So Massachusetts has a law that says
Unpaid.
it's unpaid.
Yeah, so they have to,
But they'll let me go, but it's unpaid.
it's unpaid.
But since I'm salaried,
It doesn't matter.
Gonna
You're
get paid anyway.
Exactly. And what would...
It really applies to
Yeah.
non-exempt.
It really does. And so what would happen is if you were a non-exempt, an hourly employee, for example, and you want to take the time, Massachusetts, we have to give it to you at the minimum unpaid. There's nothing that prevents us from saying, you want to take some of your PTO? Go ahead and take some of your PTO for that. I could also not allow you to take your PTO for it if I wanted to, right? So I'm not limited there. I don't have to make it paid time. I don't have to allow you to take whatever time I give you already. I don't have to allow you to take that time. Good question. So, and then this one I couldn't resist adding, Helen let me add this in. So I couldn't resist. So right now, you know, we just had a holiday. We just had one. We didn't celebrate it here necessarily in an ECB in the sense that we didn't have it off. We're online. We're always on, right? So, but for some people, not too many these days. Columbus Day is a holiday. There's a lot of controversy around Columbus Day right now, right? So we were talking the other day and said, you know, what holiday would they replace that with? And this makes perfect sense, Election Day. So President Obama has put forth that he supports this. There's a picture here of Bernie Sanders. Interesting that that's from 2015. He looks a lot older in such a short period of time. That's not a great picture from kind of where we're looking, but trust me, in the color monitor, he looks a lot older now. Shows you what an election will do to you, huh? So, but he has put forth to the Senate a bill to make Election Day a national holiday. And so it's like an example we were talking about some law the other day that it took a long time. Do you remember what law that was? Yeah, that's right. So I was trying to think of Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. It took 11 years to pass a law that says we can't discriminate against you on the basis of your genetic information. So it's, you know, sometimes these things take time. Is it going to happen now? Probably not. Maybe in 10 years? Maybe, right? Also, there's a possibility that you will see automatic voter registration as a possible future law that could come up. Interesting that the national holiday Election Day, so Puerto Rico is U.S. territory. They have it as a national holiday. So I think it's definitely somewhere down the road we're going to see this happen.
All right, I've got another poll question. What % of companies have policies about politics in the workplace?
Yes, we're wondering if you all can guess.
13.5.
13? Okay. All right, that's really low. Okay. All right. Anybody else have a guess about what percentage of organizations have a policy, a specific policy about politics in the workplace?
About 65%.
Wow, there's a very different answer. Okay. All right. Anybody work for a company that has a policy? I'm curious. The question is, do you know?
Do you know?
More like it.
Therein lies the problem, right? Okay. We're gonna tell them?
Yeah.
All right.
Should we keep on guessing?
We'll tell them.
So somewhere between 24 and 32% of organizations actually do have policies written around politics in the workplace.
Yeah, and so again, this comes from that survey that you mentioned earlier. SHRM did a survey in May of 2016 and asked this question, and so it's interesting, it's a pretty low number.
I guess I went too long.
Yeah, for sure. So I imagine the next question you have then, if you're thinking, well, so 32% have a policy, so you said 65, so, you know, do organizations need to have policies about this specifically, right? I'll leave that to Helen to take.
The answer is no, not necessarily. So just because your organization does not have a policy surrounding political discussion and whatnot in the workplace doesn't mean that you're allowed to, get your soapbox and start giving a speech in the lunchroom or in the middle of the office. They can also be umbrellaed underneath existing policies like your code of conduct, your employee handbook. So if it says you're not allowed to wear hats in the workplace and your manager comes up to you and says you need to take your Trump hat off, it's because you're not allowed to wear a hat in the workplace. So harassment policies, what can be misconstrued, and also your termination of employment at will, please.
So I think that's a really great example. Lots of other policies cover the types of things. We talked about political speech in the beginning. Some of those things, lots of other policies will cover those behaviors. So buttons, the way that your cubicle or office is decorated, asking people for campaigns, so solicitation, etc. This last one, employment at will. So if you're an employee who works at will, and the majority of employees do, there are policies that say, hey, I can let you go for no reason or any reason at all, with or without notice, as long as it's not for an illegal reason. And so we've covered all of the reasons that potentially could be illegal, because maybe you work in Colorado or California or New York, or you're a union member, or where the discussion is material in terms of protected concerted activity. But if it doesn't fall under one of those things, then I don't want to hire people who like Hillary Clinton, and I can choose not to do that. So that it's important to know that as an employee at will, that a lot of the things that aren't covered by specific anti-discrimination laws, you can use as a basis for, in fact, discriminating and not hiring someone, not promoting them, that type of thing, or letting them go. A lot of people have questions about that, I think, and makes sense that it's confusing, I think. Oh, there we go. All right, so why do we care? What are the issues with political activity at work? Well, so from a business perspective, and here at NECB, we like to focus on the business perspective. As HR people, we don't examine issues simply from the employee relations perspective of what's going to make people happy and whether or not it's going to create cohesion and teamwork. And those are important things, and HR people are certainly concerned with them, but as they relate to making the business successful, right? So the keys here, when we talk about from a business perspective why this is problematic, you can imagine, so it can be a conflict of interest with the business itself. So, and if you think about it, depending on who is saying it and what's being said, one person's views could be viewed as the entire organization's views, and that would be unfortunate. Most of you probably work for companies that have policies about who can speak on behalf of the organization, right? Who, again, that goes back to those other policies that Helen was talking about, code of conduct or employee handbook, where it talks about who is our media contact, who has the ability to say, I represent NECB in this case, and so I'm saying, so those are important things to think about.
Do you have maybe a couple of examples of one or two of those?
Sure, yeah. So the example I just gave with the perspective, you might have someone a salesperson going out and paying a call and making a comment about maybe they're an active green party and they're selling a product that is not so green, right? So and they're walking around with a campaign button, or they potentially a bumper sticker on their vehicle. It depends on what form of speech it takes, but there's a news story that's hot, they hear somebody talking about, or you go to see a client and the client brings it up. I mean, it happens, right? So that could be really problematic. In terms of productivity, you can imagine, this is the last one, you can imagine, you get into these debates, I mean, think about what is happening in the workplace. Think about, get on Facebook and try to have a conversation with someone you know about a political issue, and all of a sudden it blows up, and there's hard feelings potentially. People are avoiding others at work that they've had conversations with. They're not working well together. They're spending time chitty-chatting at the water cooler, and voices are getting raised and that type of thing. That's time that should be spent doing work, right? So there's lots of examples, and really this is, from a business perspective, this is why, one of the main reasons why we care. Also, think about like Chick-fil-A, for example. The owner has a very particular political leaning, and so they may not care for people expressing positions that are contrary, because it could be construed as some sort of a conflict or discord within the organization. The organization doesn't, isn't aligned well, that kind of thing. So, and this is a, Chick-fil-A. Some people actually go there because of their political leanings or their beliefs, and that's one of the reasons they patronize that organization. And so that could create problems for business.
So here's kind of a follow-up question.
Yeah.
So do you think, like, in general, people should just avoid political talk at work altogether?
I have a feeling that you think they should.
Well, no, like, if it's that question, then, like, if the company, is kind of a follow-up question to my first question,
Yeah.
is if I walk into my organization tomorrow that does not have a policy wearing my big Bernie button, what do I dare do that when there's no policy at all? And like, I don't know, it's very interesting. I have oodles of questions, but I'll hold back.
All right, well,
3 questions.
no, that's okay. So we can, should you want to talk about them now, or should we hold on to kind of get to the,
Maybe
okay.
at the end or
Sure,
whatever.
yeah, maybe
Whatever.
we might even address some of them, but definitely don't forget what they are. So, so there's more than just the business perspective. So now let's move to the soccer side, right? So why do we care? The other side of it. Oops, helps with the slide move. Right.
So having that what seemed out as to start as an innocent conversation, we'd say at work, could quickly become hostile, and then you've got a hostile work environment, and it just explodes out of nowhere, escalates really quickly. So that's one issue that can happen from discussing politics in the workplace. The other thing is discrimination and harassment. So if you're having a conversation, over your cubicle about which candidate supports gay marriage, and you support the candidate that does not support gay marriage, is the person who is gay in the next cubicle now feel discriminated against because you voiced your opinion that you are not for that.
That's a great example. Think about the tapes that were released last weekend in the media. All of a sudden, people come to work and want to start talking about that, and the language that gets used, all of a sudden, we're having, it's protected. This is protected speech on some level, right? But where does that move from protected speech, in the sense that not from the First Amendment, but from the sense that it's concerted activity, right? Discussion. So where does it move from that to violating some other rule or law? So in that particular instance, if we were to engage in a conversation about what happened, we could find ourselves in a position where somebody, just like in your example, somebody feels like under sexual harassment, somebody feels offended. They feel uncomfortable now with the language that's being used, even if it's just being repeated. So this is a minefield, right? Because so often your political candidates represent, have positions that represent very polarized positions on social issues that relate to very specific protected classes. So like I'm thinking, like we started talking about Mexicans and immigration, all of a sudden, now we have an issue. And, it doesn't have to be, your example was, somebody's gay, but I could be offended and I'm not gay, and I could be just as offended maybe at a child who's gay, or maybe I just have a problem with this in general. So, that just like with sexual harassment, I don't have to be the one being harassed to actually be covered under the law. I can be just a witness who overheard the conversation. So we really have to be careful about these things. The other things, the last two are interesting. The preferential treatment one, I think.
Yeah. So just because your boss supports Hillary, let's say, is he choosing another candidate that also supports Hillary over you, just because you do not, even though you are the better candidate, you can perform the job better?
I think it's hard because it's not always consciously that we make these judgments, and so, you know, I work with you, you report to me, and you support Hillary and I support Trump, and so I'd like to think that I could be unbiased, but I think just human nature, it's really difficult for that to happen, and so that kind of unconscious bias that could manifest itself in terms of how you treat that person.
You're saying during the hiring process, there would be like preferential treatment, you think?
Or promotions.
Yeah, yeah.
Or just think about anything that happens at work, the assignment of activities. What
Yeah.
you know, here in academia, you know, it's what committee are you on, you know? So I mean, it could be something as simple as that, right?
Yeah.
So
So how many of you know if you discourage political activities in the workplace, does your boss actively discourage it?
We just don't talk about it at all. It's not active, inactive, we just, no one talks about it.
okay.
It's because we're too busy actually doing real work.
I wonder. I wonder if it would be different if we were in a different part of the country, if there might be a different answer, or if we were in a different industry. And granted, we're in higher ed, but you all are not. So I wonder.
If there was a more heterogeneous population.
Absolutely.
I mean, fortunately or unfortunately, in higher ed in New England, you assume same political
Right.
affinity.
Right. Right. Yeah. If you read the Chronicle of Higher Ed, you definitely can see the
yeah.
science. Right.
Exactly.
There's no doubt. So
Yeah.
yeah. So it's interesting. Shall we tell them in terms of what HR professionals, that survey we were talking about before, done in May? So
Discourage, yeah.
So 72% of HR professionals say that their organizations actually discourage it. So the question is, are they discouraging it? Is it a set of norms, cultural norms, where it's sort of like, this is off topic, we don't talk about this, or is there a policy? Now, you all said, no policy. We saw the survey said 24 to 32% of a policy. So it sounds like it's more of a behavioral, cultural norm not to talk about it. Interesting.
It's because people get very emotional about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Are you referring to
Very
me screaming
heated.
at the TV on the
Maybe.
debate?
Yeah, maybe. I do too. I keep it in here.
So how do we discourage it? We can discourage it through prohibiting non-job related paraphernalia. So you can decorate your cubicle, but you can't put your campaign poster, hang it up on the wall there. You know, dress code, like I mentioned earlier with the hat. You don't allow hats, doesn't matter what hat you wear, no hat's allowed. And also prohibiting, like Dr. Keller mentioned, who speaks for the organization? Are you allowed to? Who's the designated person that is allowed to speak for the organization? And also, so prohibiting employees from running for political office. I'm actually not allowed because of the conflict of interest within my
State
job
employees,
with the
yeah.
state. Yep.
That's pretty common. So anybody who's listening who works for a public employer, public meaning the government of some sort, whether it's state or federal or local, there's a definitely different set of requirements that apply to you. Very different from what apply to what most of us work in the private sector. In our case now. So that's interesting. A lot of people don't know, but so running for political office, again, that is a behavior that if you are doing that potentially, that depending on which state you live in, that is not discussion in the workplace. That is an outside of work activity that if you were running for political office as a fill in the blank Democrat, I could choose to terminate you, not hire you. That would be perfectly legal, except for in the states that we talked about, where there is some sort of protection for either off-duty legal behavior or specifically political activities. So, it's a great example. Massachusetts, completely legal. Yeah, I see like a, what?
I'm asking way too many questions.
No, that's okay. Ask.
So this, the second to the last bullet point, the one you were just talking about, made me think of something. So in academia is a different beast. I think we would all agree with that.
It is.
When I was up at Norwich University, one of my colleagues in the computer science department was also running. He held a full-time faculty appointment, also running. So I don't know if like academia in general, like much more like loosey-goosey about this versus industry,
I bet it would
private
depend
sector.
on what party he was running for. And Norwich probably has a very different political leaning than maybe most of academia.
I would say
I would
say
guess
so.
as a military school, so
Yeah,
so.
very conservative. Yeah.
But I think most of academia, you know, if you were running as a Green Party or I know, as a Democrat, sure, that'd be fine. If all of a sudden you were running as a Republican,
Yeah.
it might face a little more flack,
You might get
potentially.
tenure for the first two.
Yeah. There you go, that's right,
That is very interesting.
So I think the important thing here is that these are all things that when there is a policy,
Right.
specific policy about political activity in the workplace, these are the things that are covered. They may also be covered, as you were just mentioning, in other policies. So your no solicitation policy, your dress code policy, they could be covered there too. But if you have a specific policy about this, then you don't have to have, maybe you want people to be able to solicit at work, and by that I mean maybe you want people to be able to say, hey, I'm running a marathon for, I don't know, kids with HIV and I want you to support me. So you could solicit for that, but you couldn't solicit for this because we have a specific policy. So that's why some organizations choose to create a specific policy, others organizations simply say, well, we'll rely on our no solicitation policy. Where you can get in trouble with that is, I'm curious, does anybody know if you have a no solicitation policy where you work?
There is one, but people kind of ignore it anyway.
Exactly. Because my kids are selling Girl Scout cookies, or I'm running the Boston Marathon, or I'm doing the long bike ride where you need to raise a lot of money. The PMC in Massachusetts, and I need people to sponsor me. And so as an HR person, we learned about this in class. So if you go ahead and then you allow some things and your policy says no, then you open the door, right? So now you've opened the door to this kind of solicitation as well. So, yeah, so good. The top one too, I think your policy can say, that's fine, you can discuss, but you can't do it in a way that's threatening, intimidating, no loud voices, no yelling, that kind of thing. So, I guess this one is mine. All right, so what's going to happen? Politics are going to come up. There's not a lot you can do about that. It's interesting that survey we mentioned before, SHRM did in May. They asked HR professionals, well, what do you think? Do you think that with this election for president, do you think that there were, is there going to be greater or less political volatility in the workplace? You have concerns. And interestingly enough, back in May, HR professionals, for the most part, 70% said, yeah, we think it's going to be about the same. I wonder, after some of the things that have happened recently, I wonder if we were to re-poll these people, if they would feel the same way. So it's important that we all realize that whether you discourage this behavior or not, that it's gonna happen, right? So people are going to talk about this. And it is interesting that there's not a lot of it going on, at least from the members of our audience, at your workplaces now, and I wonder if that might be a reflection of where we are in the Northeast, and people are trying to, maybe a little more cohesive in terms of political viewpoints, or maybe tighter policies in general, higher, different standards with regards to what's acceptable and what's not.
I'm also wondering if there's some sort of generational difference. Because
Yeah.
growing up, my father was very, very adamant to not tell me who he was voting for. He instilled that you were not supposed to talk about it. You weren't supposed to tell people who you were voting for. It was something you kept to yourself. So I'm wondering if, as the generations shift, how that will change, if that plays a part.
Yeah, that is interesting. 'Cause I would think that younger folks would be much more open about it. I can see them being more passionate, and I think that this particular election has drawn a lot of interest from millennials and Gen Y, Gen X even. So I think the keys from this one is, remember, you can't prohibit discussion, you can only corral it. So corral it in the sense of where it happens, the tone or tenor, how it happens, the form of political discussion. So you can certainly eliminate buttons and insignia and hats and bumper stickers, but conversation piece, that piece, social media, no. Conversations in the cafeteria, work, break areas, no. And then, as a manager, you need to remember and be ready to diffuse situations, understand that you may not have encountered it yet, but we still have how many days left till the election? Anybody counting?
Less than 3 weeks.